Over the course of history, numerous different and interesting modes of travel were made possible by human inventiveness. While trying to occupy various regions, water, and even air power, the civilizations of old came up with different incredible and strange means of transport. The ancient means of transport, like the Indian war elephants and Greek tessarakonteres, were more than just some sort of machine for movement. They were also a symbol of power, innovation, and sometimes just wild boldness. Let's take a trip back in history as we look back at 15 weird, as well as fascinating old vehicles and other forms of transport manufactured in human history. They were not only figures, but someone's vision turning into reality. 1. The Roman carpentum. The Roman carpentum was a luxurious two-wheeled covered wagon that held a special place in the daily and ceremonial existence of ancient Roman society, especially among women and priests. There are a lot of things that distinguish this car. It was usually made from tough wood supported by metallic elements. It was made so that the roads of ancient Rome, despite being rough, could be smoother. For this, it had two large wheels that were necessary for its stability and movement in such terrains. The wheels were mainly constructed from strong wood, but in some instances, metal rings were attached around them to make them last longer or aid in performance. To shield the occupants from rain or strangers looking on, the wagon had a covering over this section. The cover was made from leather, fabric, or other materials filled with intricate patterns and decorations. Paintings, carvings, and metalwork were used on carpenter parts, which were also considerably adorned. Both the decorations revealed religious symbols, mythological scenes, as well as family coats of arms denoting the owner's social and economic standing. It had a luxurious inside equally, with cushioned sitting places and fine materials. The interiors were designed for comfort, enabling its occupants to travel in style and ease. It was famously used in many ceremonial events, being common during religious processions whereby priests would use it to carry sacred objects and offerings in them. In addition to these events being spectacular, they were made even more superior, since this was purely an indication of high-standard men and devotion. Rich Roman women often made it their choice for private means of transport. The women who were high in status at that time used the carpenter, because they could not walk long distances, as they avoided being noticed by the public while visiting from one home to another, going to the temple, or attending social events. Laws were established at different times to govern the use of these carpentum, thereby limiting the number of those individuals entitled to travel in them due to certain restrictions. 2. The chariot. Historically, this vehicle has cemented its place in ancient civilizations such as the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans. It is composed of two wheels and is typically drawn by horses for war, racing, or ceremonial duties. This vehicle was used in ancient times by Egyptians, Greeks, and the Roman Empire, among other nations. These two-wheeled vehicles were used for battle purposes, as well as in normal competitions. Chariots in ancient Egypt were light and fast. This is so because they were made of a wooden frame, leather thongs, and a platform for the rider. Some had elegantly designed carvings, while others bore precious stones and gold ornaments. Their wheels were spoked, making them much lighter than other types of chariots, resulting in better maneuverability during combat situations. Greek chariots, especially those used in the famous chariot races, were very fast and agile. They would be painted using different colors and decorated with myth symbols, which made them more aerodynamic. The Roman chariots during the Grand Circus Maximus were strong and could survive harsh racing conditions. Roman chariots were used both for competing in various races and in triumphal processions if victorious in war, adorned with trophies like laurel wreaths and precious metals. The chariots had highly boosted wheels as well as very strong axles. Furthermore, factions' logos were very common. During confrontations in combat zones, chariots were utilized as portable gunnery and archery points. They facilitated high velocity and flexibility significantly, making it possible for swift attack, thereby withdrawing swiftly enough such that the opponent would not counter. Such as Ramses II, the Egyptian pharaohs largely employed carriages in their military expeditions. Chariot racing was very popular in ancient Greece and Rome. Chariot races were a part of the Olympic Games for the Greeks, while the Romans constructed large stadiums such as the Circus Maximus for this purpose. They were impressive events that attracted huge numbers of spectators because they were both life-threatening and awe-inspiring. Chariots were not mere transport vehicles. They held great symbolic significance. They symbolized might, power, as well as technological skill associated with civilizations that made use of them. Gods and heroes in chariots are a common motif in ancient art and mythology, underlining their importance for our cultures. 3. The Greek trireme. The Greek trireme was a fast and agile naval battleship with 3 ranks of paddles on each of its sides in ancient Greece, especially in war. This went ahead to become an outstanding marine engineering wonder from Greece, because it was made in such a way that its focus was on speed, ease of changing direction, and effectiveness in battle. During that time, between the 6th century BCE to the 4th century BC, it was mainly used by the Greek people and in the development of Greek naval supremacy in the Mediterranean. The trireme was about 120 feet in length and 18 feet in breadth. It had a shallow draft which enabled it to be handled on the open sea, as well as in small bays. The hull of the trireme was made of light materials like pine and fir so that it could move quickly and easily change its course. The main thing that distinguished the trireme from other ships was that there were 3 banks of oars on each board, which meant there were 170 rowers on every side of it. Though triremes were chiefly moved by oars, they also had a square sail hanging at a single mast so that when there was wind, it could help push them on their way. In case of a fight, it was possible to lower down this sail so as not to disturb rowers. The ship's direction was controlled from behind by 2 big steering paddles, which were used by an experienced helmsman capable of making fast turns during combat actions required often during warfare. The trireme's design enabled their full oar power to boost them up to 9 knots, around 10.4 mph at most. This agility combined with such speed made them effective in both fast attacks and quick withdrawals. The trireme's main job for attacks was the bronze-made ram located on the front side, known as imbolon, by this tactic termed the dial piece. A boat would move swiftly towards another ship's side to pierce its body, possibly leading to its sinking or inability to function. In another method known as perilous, one trireme would outmaneuver an enemy ship cruising close by, while another provided access to the midsection of this ship so that warriors could engage each other in close combat. Such a vessel might also be carrying around 30 heavily armored hoplites, who were Greek soldiers trained for battle on land or at sea. Once ships were locked together, it was these soldiers who battled against one another. Greek fleets used to move side by side to remain in ramming position, thereby preventing flanks from being exposed to the enemy forces. Significant resources, as well as manpower, were required for the maintenance and operation of the trireme fleet. Because of this, there arose complex logistical systems that promoted social mobility while providing payment for the services of oarsmen who were usually freeborn citizens. Naval warfare and ship design were drastically transformed by the Greek trireme, and this could be seen from a long time ago. This influenced the model used such that even future vessels were greatly impacted. Conversely, ancient maritime technology and the outstanding ability of these ships have been disclosed by the modern reconstructions today through a trireme known as Olympias. 4. The war elephant. War elephants were typically employed in regions like ancient India and Southeast Asia for military purposes. They were usually mounted with archers and other fighters aboard howdahs during battles. War elephants embodied military power and strategic assets during ancient times. David's 1975. These animals were mostly from the Indian subcontinent, emphasized for combat, thus they had to undergo thorough training before they were put at war. Young elephants were chosen based on their size, strength, and temperament. In other words, only the most robust and easily trainable elephants were selected for military purposes. Although the most rigorous process of training was involved in this trade, elephants were trained to be peaceful during wars, follow instructions, and used to noise involving combat operations, including using their trunks and tusks effectively. Howdahs were huge, tower-like constructions that were mounted on elephants. Howdahs were frequently constructed from wood and fortified using either metal or leather. They could carry numerous soldiers consisting of archers, spearmen, and officers. Some howdahs were adorned elaborately, thereby demonstrating the riches and might of the top-ranking officer or monarch. In battle, in other cases, elephants were usually armored. Metal plates, chainmail, and armor for their heads and trunks were included in the armor. Arrows, spears, and other missiles were deflected by the armor. Elephants in battle often fulfilled the function of shock troops that penetrated the opposing forces. Their gigantic mass enabled them to trample upon soldiers and create disarray in the opposing ranks. This could make a whole battalion retreat just from fear. The frightening sounds of approaching elephants could inspire nervousness that leads to a confused situation among the rivals. Their trumpeting also amplified this state, with the ground shaking by their heft. Just like during the Indian historical period, they played significant roles in major wars, among them in battles involving the Maurya Empire under Chandragupta and Ashoka. And the use of war elephants goes back to the Vedic period. In ancient India, these animals were essential for breaking gates, as they would do what human beings would fail to achieve by pushing them down. Wealth is another reason elephants participated in warfare in the Vedic period of Hinduism and Indian culture. During wars, in Burmese territories as well as those of Thailand or Cambodia, military tactics often involved the use of war elephants. The Khmer Empire and many other countries in Southeast Asia found them very useful during their conquests. In India, Alexander the Great came across war elephants, so he introduced their use to Hellenistic armies. The Near East and parts of North Africa saw elephants used in battles by the Seleucid and Ptolemaic empires. 5. The Chinese wheelbarrow. Attesting to the Han Dynasty 206 BCE 220 CE as the originator of this invention, the Chinese wheelbarrow is considered one of the most notable of all pre-modern technological advancements that were made within the transportation sector. This kind of pre-modern wheelbarrow was very pivotal within the agricultural sector, as well as construction services, military logistics, and general life among other things in China. The main feature of the Chinese wheelbarrow was that it had one wheel at the center under the load. This way, one could distribute weight more evenly so that it took less effort to steer it, and the person pushing did not feel so much pressure on themselves as compared to those pushing modern wheelbarrows, where there's usually only one wheel that is located at one end of the barrow. Early wheelbarrows used metal around their wheels and handles for strength. Though the wheel was frequently just a solid slab of wood, other models had spoked wheels like a chariot's. This would carry heavy items around with less difficulty. A wheelbarrow is a necessary tool in transporting goods and materials across different grounds because it can bear massive weights due to its frame as well as handles. Farmers relied on wheelbarrows to carry crops, soil, and fertilizers. They improved agricultural productivity by allowing people to move heavy loads quickly and enabling large-scale farming. Wheelbarrows are essential equipment for the transportation of bricks, stones, or other construction materials during construction works. Their usage made it possible for people to build roads, houses, or canals in no time. It is important to note that wheelbarrows were a crucial tool in Chinese military strategies for ferrying supplies, injured soldiers, and ammunition. This was especially so during lengthy missions and in uphill terrains where efficient goods transport would give one's army a strategic advantage over rival forces. In towns, wheelbarrows acted as common means of ferrying goods by traders and construction workers to the market and construction sites. They are common in urban areas where they were used in daily social economic activities such as buying or selling items. 6. The Assyrian battering ram. The Assyrian battering ram was a military machine used by the Assyrian Empire to prominence, as it was able to play a critical part in the Assyrian Empire's military strategy. These huge instruments were mounted on wheels designed to facilitate the penetration of any fortress like the city walls and gates, hence playing an essential part in the growth and retention of the empire. It typically consisted of a wheeled frame that supported a battering ram and enabled its movement into position. These wheels were often strengthened to support the immense weight of the structure and endure rough terrain. It was usually protected by a shield-like structure referred to as either a shelter or a mantlet. This rough protection was occasionally covered with belts or metal shields to protect the operators from enemy arrows and other missiles. The same shelter was also useful in case the opposing side would use fire to burn down the ram. The battering ram had a huge wooden beam on one side. At times it was crowned with metal. The point was usually designed to look like a bull, or just be blunt. The design enabled the point to focus the impact force on a small part of the fortification. The metal cap placed on the ram prevented the wooden beam from splintering upon impact. The breach of the enemy's fortifications was done at night or during heavy attacks with a battering ram, which allowed it to be placed in exactly the right place. The wheeled frame ensured the accuracy of the ram's location. At that point, sheltered by the roof, the men manning it would begin swinging a massive log. This was the rhythmic motion that let them strike either gates or walls violently in this rhythmical manner. The structure would get weak after several continuous impacts from the battering ram, hence dropping bricks or stones, thus creating an opening in the wall. The ram had a metallic head cap that made sure all the force was conserved, thus making every hit on the building count. Battering rams were commonly used during attack operations with other elements within it. Archers and infantry would assist the ram by attacking anyone who tried to stop it from reaching the main wall while protecting the soldiers operating it. They could then use battering rams effectively, thus enabling them to conquer well-protected cities which would have been impossible to overcome. By doing this, it resulted in the wide capture of lands by the Assyrian Empire, making them majorly powerful in the ancient Near East. This invention moved to other empires such as the Greeks, and even Rome, who then developed their own styled battering rams. 7. The Roman onager. The Roman onager was a strong war machine that played an important role in the combat tactics of old Rome. This catapult, whose name was inspired by wild-ass onager for its powerful kicking motion, was intended for carrying out bombardments from a long distance, and it was so effective in destroying enemy defenses and causing panic in besieged cities. The onager usually consisted of a wooden frame that was fixed on wheels for swift movement, which made it possible to go around easily either on battle or siege grounds. The arm of the onager was normally placed at one end, where it moved from and turned around using average human strength. It mainly hung by throwing rocks or any other article through it, when the arm was swung up by pulling it down and then releasing it up. To escalate the strength and range of shooting, a sling was usually tied at the other end of this arm. The onager had a counterweight system that stored potential energy. When the arm fell, a heavy weight rose which, on release, gave enough force to throw the projectile a long way. It was this design that enabled an onager to throw huge stones, incendiary devices, or animal bodies to the farthest point ever imagined. The stones were developed to deal maximum destruction to adversary walls and structures when they hit. This form of siege machine is sited at a distance that is safe from enemy defenses. This made it easy for Roman engineering personnel to hastily mount and alter the angles at which they were fired. The onager could throw a variety of missiles, some of them being heavy stones that were up to several hundred pounds in weight. Soldiers made the onager work in a team. One member of the crew would usually be in charge of pulling the arm by strings while loading missiles. The others focused on aiming and launching. In this case, this machine needed to hit the enemy's forts accurately if it were to be effective at all. When onager was in use, it affected the minds of defenders. The opponents were frequently frightened, disordered, or even demoralized by the loud noise caused by springs released suddenly at the time when huge rocks slammed against walls. During Roman military operations, it was useful in breaking through what seemed impenetrable barriers such as walls, and on this account has greatly contributed to Rome's military achievements. 8. The Viking longship. The Viking longship was an emblematical vessel in the medieval era that embodied the Vikings' seafaring ability during what is called the Viking Ages, circa 793 AD 1066 AD. It was a multi-purpose ship that was carefully made for several purposes like exploration, trade, as well as combat. Longships are known for being long and skinny, a design that enables them to sail fast and change directions quickly. Their draft is so shallow that they can float on shallow rivers or estuaries and are best suited for traveling across vast oceans due to their elongated shape. Clinker building, a method of overlapping planks made from oak that gave the longship strength and flexibility, was its typical feature. Therefore, such vessels could survive in adverse conditions prevailing in the North Atlantic Ocean since the late Middle Ages. Viking longships featured one square sail crafted from wool or linen for steering when the wind was moving in the right direction desired. They also happened to have perfect rowing capabilities and up to 30 oars on every side, which made it easy for them to be rowed, especially when the water was calm, or in instances when they had to navigate through rivers. At the front end of most longships, there were dragon or serpent-shaped carvings. The use of these symbols was to make one believe in the Norse gods and also use them as delightful things to the eyes. It is through the use of longships that the Vikings extensively explored new lands. For instance, they used them to reach North America, Vinland, Greenland, and even parts of the Mediterranean coastline today. Viking raids and military ventures wouldn't have been the same without the longships. Owing to their high speed and maneuverability, they could easily make ambushes on the seashore villages and monasteries when the water was down. Their low keel facilitated an instant landing on the seacoasts and banks of the rivers, thereby giving the Vikings an upper hand during battles. 9. The Egyptian ceremonial barge. The Egyptians had a deep culture and spiritual ethos, which was only seen through the Egyptian ceremonial barge boat. This was a significant boat, which was used predominantly for rituals in the Nile River, which in essence was the main thoroughfare that allowed the gods to reach human beings in the Egyptian civilization. Many of the boats were of considerable size, intended to transport priests, nobles, and other valuable offerings. They were characterized by long, slender hulls that made it easy for them to move across the waters of the Nile River. These vessels were elaborate with fine engravings and paintings in numerous colors like gold leaf, hieroglyphs, deities or pharaohs' wealth, power, plus scenes from myths, among others. There were shields with sails on ceremonial barges which enabled them to catch air currents on the Nile. Oars helped make them adjustable and useful even in case of adverse winds. As a result of such adaptation to various conditions, various merits were found in them. The front and rear ends of these boats were sometimes adorned with images of deities or emblematic creatures like hawks symbolizing Horus and crocodiles about Sopek, thus adding religious value to these ships. Ancient Egyptians customarily used these boats during religious processions in which they transported holy statues or gifts to sanctuaries and other sacred establishments. Those processions were an essential part of the gods' worship, destined to ensure deities' benevolence. Some of these ritual boats were also utilized in funeral practices aimed at delivering the dead and their offerings to the other world. The significance of traveling over water was that it represented an act of moving from one world into another, an aspect deep-rooted in Egyptian belief. In festivals such as the Opet festival, ceremonial barges were used to move the statue of the god Amun between temples. The occasion entailed complex rituals and marked a period for great feasting and community coming together. People still treasure Egyptian ceremonial boats for design and meaning. Recent findings like a luxury boat found very close to the Great Pyramid have a lot of useful information on how Egyptian people made their living through the sea and believed in gods. The Nile and the rich artistic traditions of the Egyptians, as well as their religious beliefs, can be seen from these sacred items. In the ancient Egyptian context, the ceremonial barge remains a strong symbol of majesty and spirituality. 10. The Incan Llama Caravan. The Incan Empire was connected through transportation and trade networks by a sophisticated caravan that transported goods and maintained communication across the empire using llamas, hence making their role integral in the incarnation society during the pre-Columbian era. The Incas used llamas mainly for carrying goods. For these animals suited high altitudes and rough ground so much they could carry as much as 30 kilos or 66 pounds across any distance, which remained consistent with traders. A caravan ranged from several hundred to thousands of llamas while being directed by seasoned herders called llameros. These herders had intimate knowledge of the landscape and the needs of the llamas, ensuring the animals were well fed and rested during the journey. The caravans had all sorts of stuff, for example, agricultural produce, textiles, pottery, metalwork, etc. There were also some important things like maize, potatoes, and dried fish being transported from the coastal regions to the interior areas, which made them trade and distribute resources easily. The Inca road system, known as the Cupac Nan, connected various parts of the empire covering over 40,000 kilometers, 25,000 miles. Derived from stone paving in design, which had drainage systems and tambos, this network was characterized by a high level of engineering. They were also fitted with sophisticated suspension bridges made with woven grass ropes which caravans used to cross steep valleys and rivers. To provide shelter, food, and water to llamas and their droves along the way, tambos were strategically positioned along the routes, acting as administrative districts for taxation and redistribution of products. Through their ability to serve as conduits connecting diverse ecological areas, the thriving trading networks enjoyed significant support from llama caravans too. This arrangement consequently enabled the Incas to access items like oceanic fish that they could not get within their vicinity. Llamas were considered by the Inca people to be sacred animals and played an important role in their society. Religious beliefs and transportation and trade matters were closely tied to them. They appeared quite often in the Incan art, with ceremonies featuring them as symbols of economic success. The way llama caravans were designed indicated how structured the Incan society was. The Incan rulers could hold their centralized authority in place by controlling the movement of goods as well as resources through the state. 11. Mavin, the Celtic chariot. The Celt chariot served a significant function in the life and culture of ancient Celt, both practically and symbolically during wars or ceremonial events. They possessed a horse-drawn carriage that was characterized by complex design, indicating the artistic nature and military and social organization of the Celt as a result of superior craftwork that characterized ancient Celt civilization. The chariot's main body was made from locally sourced wood and was reinforced with bindings and metal fixtures for strengthening. Furthermore, durability and performance were gained from using iron or bronze on the axles and wheel rims. Normally, these wheels had a solid spoked construction that struck a balance between strength versus flexibility. In addition to this, some rims were banded with iron to minimize wear and tear. Legendary were the designs of Celtic chariots. They often had woodworks carved with patterns of swirls, knots, and other motifs typical of Celtic art, while sometimes their metallic parts, such as the hubs as well as linchpins, were decorated using either inlaid precious metals or by making intricate engravings. Chariots were utilized in warfare by warriors as mobile platforms to enable ease of movement on the battlefield, hence they could use them to race across the battlegrounds. Normally, a Celtic driver and a warrior would together form a team that pushed forward, often wielding spears or shooting arrows from the moving vehicle as the last move before dismounting to confront the enemy at close quarters. The wonderful pace and maneuverability that characterized these vehicles served as a tactical edge for the Celtic clans. Aside from being instruments of war, chariots were highly significant in times of ceremony. They found uses in both social and religious festivals, as well as critical public occasions. The chariot, usually adorned extravagantly, represented authority and honor, hence indicating the position of its possessor. In European archaeological finds, one can see marks of the olden days Celtic war chariot. At places like Latine, Switzerland with its renowned burial grounds, and Wetwang in England, which are known for their famous chariot burials, researchers have managed to unearth important information regarding how these wagons were made and how they were used. This information gives us an idea about the order within society among ancient Celts, their military activities, and how well they crafted things too. 12. The Mesopotamian reed boat. The Mesopotamian reed boat was a great creation in ancient engineering that helped people in Mesopotamia in their everyday lives. It was made of bundles of reeds which served as means of transport, fishing as well, and trade among the rivers that passed through that area, and most importantly Tigris and Euphrates streams. The most commonly used material was the common reed Phragmites australis that abundantly grew on riverbanks. This material was light and buoyant, as well as flexible, making it suitable for boat building purposes. Reeds cut were dried before being tightly bound using ropes made from natural fibers. Consequently, the hull was created by lashing together the bundles. Through this technique, a strong and water-resistant feature was enabled. Reed boats ranged in size from small, one-person fishing vessels to bigger boats that could carry goods and more than one passenger. These boats usually had a round or oval form, with an upcurved prow and stern that facilitated their movement along river waterways. Occasionally, bitumen, a kind of natural tar substance, was applied to reed bundles for buoyancy and lastingness. This waterproofing technique helped prevent water from seeping into the boat, extending its lifespan. One of the oldest known literary works is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which cites reed boats. In seeking immortality, the hero Gilgamesh utilizes a reed boat to cross waters, thus emphasizing their significance in Mesopotamian narratives. The use of reed boats represented the resourcefulness and flexibility of Mesopotamian culture. The broader Mesopotamian society's capacity to effectively use its environment was mirrored by its skill in constructing durable, operational vessels from natural materials. 13. The Roman corvus. During naval battles, Roman warships utilized a boarding device that incorporated a lengthy plank that had spikes at its tail for dropping on a rival ship, thereby permitting soldiers onto this ship on board. In naval warfare during the First Punic War 264–241 BCE, the corvus, also known as the crow, was introduced as a turning point. In consequence, the Roman Navy was in a state of transforming naval battles into something resembling land combat wherein their soldiers were superior. A long plank of wood approximately 11 meters 36 feet long was what made up most of the corvus. It was a stable platform where soldiers could walk from one ship to the other when they crossed from one boat to another. The end part had a thick iron spike which was meant to puncture and hold itself firm on the enemy's boat. For this reason, when boarding, these corvus were always firmly attached. The corvus, a boarding plank that could be raised or lowered, was mounted on a pivot at the bow of a Roman warship. It was stored against a mast or boom when not in use. There were rails or handholds along it for stability and safety reasons. Soldiers could cross it without falling even during the battle. When in place, the corvus would be lowered onto the enemy ship. An iron spike attached to one end of it would penetrate the deck, linking the two vessels further. Around that time, equipped with heavy defensive weapons and skilled in melee fights, the Roman warriors would hurry over its length to enter the enemy's vessel. Hence, no complex work was necessary for Romans while entering into close combat because it was favorable for them. Using its superior training and discipline, the Roman enemy ship would be quickly overrun with the crew. Sea wars were turned by corvus from the traditional power of the navy like the Carthaginians into personnel conflicts where Romans had better experience than any other foe. Nevertheless, severe marine conditions often had their way with corvus, resulting in unstable Roman vessels that could easily capsize. This issue mostly arose during naval encounters in the high seas. 14. The Chinese juggernaut. A Chinese juggernaut, identified as a war wagon, was a powerful ancient military device that aimed at cutting across the front lines of the enemy to provide soldiers with movable protection. In Chinese wars, these huge defensive cars, especially in times of heavy conflict, were very important. Soldiers and weapons were carried in the huge war wagons. They were thus impressive in battle with able hands for both attack and defense. They had a lot of weapon control. Additionally, they were capable of protecting themselves against arrows, as well as spears among other missiles by the thick planks, often iron-covered leather, that reinforced their sides. War wagons were equipped with various weapons, Among them were crossbows, spears, and sometimes early forms of gunpowder-based weapons like fire lances or small cannons. These weapons facilitated the soldiers inside to attack enemies while being covered. For all their size, war wagons had mobility in view when being constructed. This mobility was achieved by mounting them on large sturdy wheels, usually fitted with metal rims. The wheels were typically drawn by teams of horses or oxen, and sometimes by people in difficult terrain. War wagons often had slits or small openings through which soldiers could shoot weapons without exposing themselves. Some designs included retractable spikes or blades on the sides of the wheels, thereby adding a defensive mechanism against infantry attacks. The sight of a large, armored war wagon heading towards them could strike fear into the hearts of enemy soldiers. Frequently, these war machines had a major psychological effect on how well they worked. The emergence of Chinese war wagon designs had ripple effects on subsequent military technologies, such as the European war wagons for Hussite forces used during the Hussite Wars of the 15th century. 15. The Greek tessarakonteres. During the Hellenistic period, a notable ship was built. It was called the tessarakonteres, a Greek term which means 40-rowed. This vessel stands as proof of what ancient Greek shipbuilders could do, despite their ambitiousness and engineering talents. According to historical research, this gigantic warship was constructed by Ptolemy IV Philopator of Egypt, and it had about 40 rows of oars. This made it more of an engineering wonder than a weapon of war in reality. Historical accounts suggest that its length was approximately 130 meters, 427 feet long, making it one of the largest ships ever built. 40-rowed referred to how the oars were stacked vertically on top of each other on rowing benches. The term 40-rowed does not mean there were 40 individual rows of oars on each side, but a complicated system of multiple levels of oarsmen. Some estimates indicate 1,000 times more rowers were needed on board the ship. Indeed, some historical sources suggest that no less than 4,000 rowers were necessary, besides other people on board responsible for guiding the ship, repairing it, and dealing with military issues. It would be incredibly difficult to organize the activities of such a large crew. Egypt's naval supremacy and technological prowess were epitomized by the tessarakonteres' sheer dimensions and grandeur. It was built to amaze allies and enemies alike, to show what the Hellenistic kingdom could achieve with its resources and capabilities. It is frequently referred to as an instance where rulers went to great lengths just so they could show their authority as well as riches. It reflects the competitive spirit of the Hellenistic period, where grand projects were a means of achieving prestige.